I've always been fascinated with the brain, the anatomy of the brain, the processes of the brain, the chemicals in the brain, the components, how all of those things interact in order to give us the capacity to live in a three-dimensional world. It all begins with your brain processing information. And that information comes from your sensory receptors. Your sense of smell, your sense of touch, your sense of sound. So your brain process starts with input from your sensory organs, and it transforms physical stimuli such as touch, heat, sound waves, or photons of light into electrical chemical signals. So, what is light, sound, and touch? It is information. Why is something blue versus something red? Well, the color spectrum shows you the number of the photons of light that hit that object, and then we perceive that to be red, blue, green, so on and so forth. Sound, the number of taps. When you listen to a song, the rhythm. How many taps, which is a number. Touch, how many times are you touching somebody? Sounds wrong, right? But you get what I'm saying. All of this is based upon a number. And the physical manifestation of that number is matter. Matter is made out of particles. It's made out of atoms. Atoms are made out of neutrons and electrons. Neutrons and electrons are made out of small particles, which are quarks. And the quarks are made out of smaller particles, which are magnetic fields. In science, everything is composed of something smaller. And so the smallest so far that scientists have been able to break down matter is into magnetic fields that make the quarks. So your brain processes that matter, which is a physical object that gives your sensory organs stimuli such as sound, light, touch. And then the information is transformed by the algorithms of the brain in both bottom-up and top-down processing. And so when your brain sees something, for instance, imagine looking at blades of grass. Although your brain processes every blade of grass when you look down at your shoes, a healthy attention filter prevents you from noticing them individually. In contrast, you might pick out your name even when spoken in a noisy room. There are many stages of processing, and the results of processing are modulated by attention repeatedly. In order for the brain to process information, it must first be stored. And that's why I say it's very important what you store into your brain, the information that you store. If your brain constantly is focused on negativity, the news, violent crime, music that talks about how women are bitches and whores, talks about violence, how bad the police are, how bad the country is, how bad humans are, then your brain is going to store that information. And if you focus a lot on it, it's going to be maintained. The theory is, and like I said, neuroscience is a fairly new field. We haven't even scratched the surface of how the anatomy, structure, and processes of the brain really work. But basically, the hypothesis, according to some studies, is that memory storage works for roughly 20 seconds, and it's maintained by an electrical signal, which is a loop through a particular series of neurons. That's your short-term memory. It is stored for 20 seconds or less. But information in long-term memory is hypothesized to be maintained in the structure of certain types of proteins. Then the information must be retrieved after it is processed and stored in certain areas of the brain. So your thalamus, your amygdala, your cerebellum, they each store components of your memory. And then you put that all together, sort of like a computer processing information. That's why they say perception creates reality. You could have experienced the same event I experienced. For instance, a car wreck, a wedding, a sporting event, an election. We both saw the same physical stimuli, but the way our brain processed that information, the way it organized it, and the way it retrieves it is going to be different. That's why in certain circumstances, both individuals went through the same event, but they just perceive it in different ways. And so basically, all of that helps us be able to perceive our three-dimensional world. Now, why do I call this a three-dimensional world? Well, according to physics, a dimension can be defined as the magnitude of something in a particular direction. Everything that surrounds us is made up of three dimensions. Think about it. The chair you're sitting in, the computer or smartphone you're using to listen to this information. So the first is the zero dimension. So let me draw a dot here. So the zero dimension is a dot. A dot, think about it, does not have direction or magnitude. So this is the zero dimension. The first dimension is going to be a straight line. So get the dot, draw a straight line. And the reason that this straight line is the first dimension is because we can measure the length of the dimension. So this is 1D, the first dimension. The second dimension is if you draw both lines on the end of this. So look at this. This creates a square, right? So not only can we measure the length of the line, but we can also measure the width, how wide it is. See, a normal line has no width, it's just a straight line, right? You can measure how long it is, but width is only when you add another line to it. Now the third dimension would be if you draw two more lines right here. And I'm a poor artist, I apologize, that's not how I was gifted. I know that's a poor cube. A lot of my family members can draw, and I did not get the ability to do that, and I apologize for my poor drawing. But it makes a cube, right? And so it would be the third dimension because we can measure not only the length and the width, but also the height. So a line is the length. A square is the width. And then when you add more lines to it, it's the height. Now, what if the cube started moving? I can't really do this here, but let me do my poor way. Well then, how do we pinpoint the position of the cube? Time. And that is Einstein's theory of relativity, theory of time and space. We won't get into that right now. But for something to be a dimension, it must have direction and magnitude. So time can be measured, and time always flows forward. So we know the metric that we're going to measure it by. So think about it. Your brain processes the four dimensions that make up reality, the three dimensions that make up every object, this chair that I'm sitting on, this table, this paper, all of this has three dimensions. And then when you add in time, how much time have I spent writing on this paper? Because that can help you measure the direction and magnitude. And then all of that is processed through stimuli. Sound, light, which is information, which makes up physical objects, which is made out of particles, which is made out of matter. And so it's just a fascinating thing to think that your brain can process all this information. Now, thinking about this, what you choose to put into your brain is very important. If you focus your thoughts on negativity, then your brain will form neurons. And these neurons will connect together and create neurological pathways of negativity. But if you train your brain to think realistically, I always tell people this, it's not about being positive all the time. It's about having a positive outlook, but about knowing how to deal with pain. We're always going to have pain. We're always going to be hot, sore, cold, hungry, thirsty. But how do you deal with that pain? And so your brain can absorb that information, and the information you put into that brain can better be organized for you to retrieve those memories.